We're used to thinking of architecture in terms of the pleasure it gives the eye. An ancient city like this, Sana'a, capital of North Yemen, still preserves much of the architecture of centuries, and for that reason we find it beautiful. But for the people who build the houses and live in them, architecture may have a different role. In a society as old as the Yemen and as cut off from the rest of the world, an architectural style has developed which is first and foremost a response to human needs. The need for shelter, comfort, warmth, family life, social contact, eating, drinking, all of these are reflected in a unique style of architecture. In this film, we will explore the way in which a style of architecture is shaped by a culture. We will see how the history and geography of the Yemen has left its mark on the colors, shapes and designs of buildings, from the domestic scale of village houses to public buildings like mosques and caravanserais. In spite of its isolated position at the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula, the Yemen has played an important role in the history of the Near East. First as a source of spices like frankincense and myrrh, and then as an importer of more spices and luxury goods from the Far East, the Yemenis were monopoly suppliers to the ancient Egyptians, Greeks and Romans. Regular caravans would make the 2,000-kilometer journey from Yemen to the Mediterranean. Along the route, merchants would seek the protection of the rulers of the kingdoms through which they passed. Kingdoms such as Saba and Ma'in, Himyar and Qataban. The kingdom of Saba, the Sheba of the Bible, lasted 1,000 years and displayed a vivid geometric style in its buildings and inscriptions. The Sabaeans developed advanced techniques of engineering and construction that culminated in the Ma'rib Dam, the heart of an irrigation system that watered 1,600 hectares of fields, providing food for up to 300,000 people. Today, much of the country still benefits from the fertile soil that led to the Romans calling the area Arabia Felix, Fortunate Arabia. But the prosperity brought by the spice trade disappeared as the Romans found new routes to the east. Without the motivation to maintain this huge construction, the Ma'rib Dam fell into disrepair and eventually burst, destroying the capital city of Saba. It symbolized the decline and eventual disappearance of these civilizations as Islam swept down the Arabian Peninsula from the north. Today, the city of Ma'rib is isolated and deserted, a pale imitation of its former thriving self. But one remnant of that culture still speaks to us today. The Yemenis, generation after generation, have continued to produce an architecture that reflects the universal human desire to build complex and functional structures to live in. It's easy to forget how even a large building is the product of human hands. And on a domestic scale, the builder is often building for his own needs, free to build a house the way he and his family feel best, adding a room from time to time, putting doors and windows exactly where they want them. The use of a mud-based mixture applied by hand can turn architecture into sculpture. The reliance on local materials means that it's often difficult to tell where the landscape ends and the buildings begin. In the valleys, there's little stone to use in construction, but as the land rises towards the mountains, more and more stone becomes available for walls and houses. The Yemenis are a mountain people and have always got the best out of their rugged landscape. The technique of building and maintaining terraces dates back 1,000 years, to the time when people drifted away from the well-irrigated valleys to establish a foothold in mountains that rise to 3,000 meters. They moved to the tops of these mountains and built villages that reflect the strong sense of community in a traditional society. There are few isolated houses in these mountains. Instead, there is an almost organic quality about the layout of a Yemeni mountain village, as the relationships within the community shape the architecture of the settlement. They solved the problem of water by building giant cisterns to collect the rain. When you're a tribal society, with all the rivalries that social structure entails, the design of any individual community is going to have an important defensive function to keep away any intruders who've managed to travel this far up the mountain. The houses here huddle together to present a monolithic wall around the community. The lower reaches of the wall are steep and difficult to climb. The entrance to the village is narrow and easily defended. In a city like the capital, Sana'a, defensive principles also shape the individual houses that are made self-sufficient in the case of a siege. There are 6,000 of these ancient family houses in the city. A typical Sana'a townhouse has a traditional layout, from the lower stone floors where the livestock are kept to the higher brick-clad levels with living space for the family. Over the centuries, the builders of these houses have incorporated many key principles of ventilation and air conditioning, sanitation, lighting and heating. And outside, the houses of each quarter of the city are grouped around communal gardens, supplying the families with vegetables and fruit. The soil of these gardens is irrigated with discarded water from some of Sana'a's 100 mosques. These too are part of the unique cityscape, and like the rest of the city, they're in a remarkable state of preservation. But what makes a city like Sana'a so homogeneous? How has it managed to preserve so many buildings, both public and domestic? It must have something to do with the fact that the buildings have evolved a structure and a design that integrates easily with the style of family life and social customs that still predominate in 20th century Yemen. Also, of course, many of the needs of this community have not changed over the years. People still need to buy and sell, and they still like to know where to find particular goods and services. So the layout of Sanaa's market, Souq al-Malh, is divided by profession, trade and merchandise. Sometimes the individual features of a culture can impinge on its architecture in surprising ways. In this part of the souk, you can buy qat, a stimulant leaf that is almost exclusive to the culture of the Yemen. Qat is the leaves of a shrub that grows up to 3 meters on the high plains and mountain terraces. For the Yemenis, these green leaves are an important source of personal and social stimulation. So much so that the highest room in the tower houses of Sana'a is set aside for the daily routine of qat chewing, where friends come round after lunch and may stay until dinner time. The name of this room, Mafraj, means the place that dispels grief and anxiety. The Mafraj has windows all round and is the most decorated room in the house, enhancing the effect of the qat. One of the most characteristic features of the houses of Sana'a is these intricate lime-wash designs that pick out the three-dimensional patterns of the windows and brickwork. These designs reflect a pervasive spirit of meticulous ornamentation that recurs in the people's clothes and trimmings. Sana'a is the jewel of Yemeni architecture, but wherever you go in the country, you find an architectural style that has its own special characteristics, influenced by topography, weather, and culture. In the coastal strip, the town of Zabid used to be a major Islamic learning center, the Oxford or Cambridge of medieval Yemen. Here Here, the shortage of stone led to complex brick buildings, with much of the decoration coming from the laying of brick in intricate patterns. Once, Zabid had nearly 300 active mosques and schools, in one of which the eponymous inventor of algebra taught his new mathematical system. Now the town is neglected and has only a fraction of its former population. The dilemma facing a country like Yemen is a familiar one: how to preserve the best of the past while taking advantage of the benefits of 20th century technology and town planning. The pressure to expand and improve a city can be destructive in two ways. It can destroy individual buildings, although the thriving social use of buildings can help prevent that, but it can also destroy the traditional patterns of a medieval city like Sana'a, changing the course of streets, breaking up squares and gardens, and creating urban sprawl. When Yemen became a republic in 1962, its new government set about a program of economic and social improvements that were designed to redress what they saw as the effects of centuries of stagnation on the Yemeni people. But such improvements had serious consequences for the Sana'a cityscape. New traffic patterns, up-to-date building materials, modern architectural designs, all of these began to eat away at the unique architecture of the city. Similar pressures acted on the more rural areas, driving people from their fortress villages to the agricultural land around them. The cramped conditions in a city trying to come to terms with the motor car drive more people away from the older areas. At the same time, the city walls crumble and contribute to a general air of dilapidation around the city. Left to itself and to normal commercial and social pressure, Sana'a could go the way of many other ancient cities which have been forced to confront the 20th century, and another priceless architectural treasure would be lost. Fortunately, it hasn't been left to itself. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, has started a campaign to save the city. A council of trustees considers ways to preserve and restore the old city. They're planning to do more than rebuild crumbling walls. Part of their task is to encourage a resurgence of the social factors that both restore and maintain a traditional community. By planning new street paving, they'll encourage people to re-enter derelict areas. By restoring buildings like this old inn or caravanserai, they encourage a resurgence of interest in some of the distinctive features of Yemeni architecture. All this restoration work has one additional effect on society as a whole. It encourages the remaining craftsmen, specialists in construction or carving, metalwork or plasterwork, to revive skills that were going out of fashion and to pass them on to a new generation. The preservation and restoration of a unique architectural style has become something that transcends mere buildings and gives Yemeni society a focus for pride and a sense of the importance of its past, as well as of the possibilities for its future.